It was a shame that the guy who nearly ruined my already hectic day looked like he had walked straight out of those vivid dreams of mine that I'd rather not share. But finding the man attractive wasn't as insulting to my self-respect as was the fact that I wasn't really upset at him. If anything, I was nervous. More than I was 5 minutes ago. To look upset, I poked my soaked shirt. "What the?" "I am sorry," the guy was saying. "My daughter's a little too excited today." I was paying attention to her, and I didn't notice where I was going. Not that it justifies what I did, but I snapped my eyes shut and tried to forget how he looked. But just because one of my senses were forcefully shut did not mean my other senses were not working. In particular, my nose. I could smell his cologne from this distance. Would it be gay that I kind of wanted to nose along his collarbones to better understand the smell? It sounded a little gay in my head. "It's alright," I replied and opened my eyes when I felt a tiny presence beside me. It was Finn. Obviously it was Finn. In the background, I could hear a girly giggle. I just need to, do something about it. With my clean hand, I rubbed a hand over Finn's small head and marveled at how soft it felt under my fingers. "I can help," the guy offered and leaned down a little to grab a small hand. I found a little girl curiously peeking at me through her lashes. Although I could not really draw a resemblance between her and the guy, I understood she was his daughter. "I think our children know each other." I observed the little pokes Finn and the girl were throwing at each other, and the small giggles they kept sharing. "I believe so. He is Finn. Ariel." He introduced his daughter first, before he introduced himself. And if it were not for the little edge in my eyebrow, I didn't think he would have remembered that little thing. "I'm David." He sounded a little bashful. "Blake," I replied and shook my left hand with his. The movement was a little awkward, but that didn't mean I didn't notice the small size difference in our hands. God, it was embarrassing how attracted I was to this guy. I wondered if he could sense it. I wondered if he had someone waiting for him at home. "Blake, I can help you with that. I have a couple of spare shirts in my car." He pointed behind himself to what he probably believed was the parking lot, but the parking lot was on my left, and not behind him. He really acted like a fool. God, it was attractive. "If you allow me? I do not think that's comfortable." "No, it's not, but the kids, they can play together. The meeting's about to start. Maybe we can ask some parents to take care of them for a while?" I looked down at the shirt and realized that I needed a change. I nodded with a sigh and directed Finn to stay right here and play with Ariel meanwhile. We hadn't even left the auditorium and I could already hear the familiar giggles over the loud chatter of other children and their parents. The walk to the parking lot was, well, awkward. It wasn't really a surprise to me because I often turned tongue-tied around the guys I found shamelessly attractive. In the last few months, and after everything, this was the first time I had allowed myself to feel attracted to another man. It made sense that I didn't know how the hell I was supposed to act in such close proximity. "I always keep spare shirts with me," David said and unlocked his car. "Ariel is a hyperactive child. Sometimes it's hard to keep up with her." "I am assuming this has happened to you before?" He gave a small laugh. "It has." I bit my bottom lip and looked up at him. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to tell him to turn around. It was basic decency. As if understanding it all, he let out a small, "Oh," and turned around with a small flush up his cheeks. As I changed, I tried not to pay attention to the very details of his broad shoulders. God help me. All these soft feelings, however, changed for a few minutes when I sat in front of Finn's homeroom teacher and heard her narrating in a disappointing tone that Finn's grades weren't looking good. I turned to Finn. A look of fear crossed my face. "Finn, you said you scored an A+ in math." "I did," Finn replied, and turned to his teacher. "Math was A+. "Oh, Finn," she said and stopped to look at the mark sheet before letting out a soft, Oops, looks like I made a mistake. This is not Finn's mark sheet. It's Ariel's. She furiously apologized as I let out some breath. Here, this is Finn's mark sheet. And, well, it looked good. A few days later. Uncle? Finn said, and I perked up. It was past his bedtime, and I could already hear all of the whines he was sure to let out tomorrow morning. Finn, why are you still awake? I couldn't sleep, he replied and softly walked up to me. Can I sleep here tonight? I sighed and opened my arms to welcome him in. Bad dreams? He shook his head on my chest. I was thinking. I let out a small laugh. You were thinking? About what? Who's going to be your partner for the competition? On the conference day, Finn's homeroom teacher had clapped her hands to gather all of the parents' attention. In a sweet voice, she announced that the school was holding a small competition for the parents to create a sense of community among the parents and the students. It was a baking competition, and the kids were going to serve as the judges. Obviously, Finn wanted me to participate in something I had absolutely no knowledge about. But disappointing him was the last thing I wanted. I haven't thought of that, Finn. I don't know anyone. You can suggest it to me. Ariel's dad, was his answer. I immediately wished that I hadn't been so kind as to ask for some suggestions. It wasn't because I didn't want to meet David again, but I feared what I would become in front of him. However, it was true that I liked how relaxed I felt next to him. Suddenly, the burden I'd been carrying for the past few months didn't really feel like a burden at all whenever I was near him. He gave me more things to think about than the past tragedies both Finn and I had been through. And it all happened during a few hours of interactions with David. In the past few days, I often wondered how much different it would be if we interacted more. I will be able to meet Ariel too. Yeah, you're always thinking about yourself, kid. Finn giggled and hugged me tighter. I love you, my sweet uncle. Always confessing when you need something, huh? I rubbed his head and smiled when he giggled. Well, if this would make Finn happy, I was going to do it. The next day. David was sending off Ariel when I saw him the next morning. I hurriedly grabbed a giggling Finn's hand and nervously found my way to David. I was sure I was sweating. I only hoped that it did not hurt my pretty nice face. It would not be a good first impression. Hi, I said as Finn and Ariel greeted each other. They were giggling so loudly that I almost couldn't hear David's soft, "Hey, you're safe today. I have no coffee with me." I gave a small laugh and then suddenly remembered. I'm sorry, I forgot to bring your shirt. That's alright, I have a lot with me. He softly smiled. When Finn and Ariel left, I ran a nervous hand through my hair and looked up at him. And, God, did he look majestic. I wondered where I should begin, but he beat me to it. Hey, I was wondering if you'd like to pair with me. I'm sure the kids will probably put our names together. And there it was. I hadn't even needed to say it. I wanted to talk about that too. How about we discuss it over a cup of coffee? I looked down at my shirt and then at him. He gave a small laugh. I promise, it was a one-time thing. Prove it, I replied. Half an hour later, we were at a local cafe. When I said I wanted to drink black coffee, David turned to me with a surprised face. You do not look like someone who drinks that. I checked myself. Sure, I didn't really look like your average tough guy, but looks rarely spoke the truth. I like black coffee. Of course you do, he replied and ordered one for himself too. So, he said when we finally settled down, have you thought of what we could bake? I don't know how to bake, I confessed. I sipped it on my black coffee and balked at how distasteful it tasted. Was black coffee always this bad? I wondered. I was hoping you knew baking. I do. He leaned against his chair. And I have a perfect idea. Sometime later. The competition was still 8 days away. But David came to the conclusion that it would be better if we started practicing as soon as possible. Nothing in our adult lives could make it sound important if not for Finn and Ariel. It was for their sake that we agreed to meet at my place on the following Saturday. Ariel and Finn immediately set the most important task for them: homework. David and I, well, focused on more adult-like behavior. "This is my room," I said and opened the door to my bedroom. "It's..." David began and stopped as he walked further into the room. He observed my room and stood in front of the same paintings I'd painted when I was a bit younger. Then he looked at the fairy lights hanging off the walls, and finally the succulents sitting on the windowsill. "Cozy," he finished. "It's cozy." "Thanks," I replied and pushed the fringes off my face. "Let's go." "The kitchen? I think it would be nice to cook something for the kids." "Yeah," he agreed, his eyes drifting over the photo frames hanging off the walls of my bedroom and the living room. But he didn't ask for anything, and although slightly disappointed, I was also glad. I wasn't sure if I wanted to discuss it so soon. He turned to me with a smile. "I think something light should work out." So we cooked some pasta for the kids and ourselves. As the kids ate their pasta and watched their cartoons, David and I settled quietly in the kitchen, each leaning against the wall or the counter. I couldn't deny the fact that it kind of looked like a familiar setting. The very thought of it brought warm feelings in me. It was like finally waking up to a warm morning. "Your cooking is really nice," David muttered. "Thanks. Most of it came from my late older sister, and some of it from my mom. Childhood habits sometimes serve you well. And, well, if that part of the conversation wasn't indicative enough of the awkwardness between us, I wasn't sure what would be. Finn and Ariel were still busy watching their favorite cartoon and eating their pasta when David brought up his marriage, or his previous marriage. Now that was an interesting turn in the conversation. Not only did it make the whole baking process easier, but I believed it also helped build trust between us. It was a win-win situation for me. Malt liked being at home. Or, well, at least he said he did. He then said that Malt was his first boyfriend and ex-husband. Malt and David had adopted Ariel 5 years back when she was still a little baby. They believed her arrival would only strengthen the love they shared. But it all fell apart. "Honestly, I blame myself as much as I blame him for it." He was still kneading the dough, and I couldn't help but stand uselessly next to him. He said I could learn from it. But, well, at that time we were kind of busy blaming each other for everything. So I didn't really come to this conclusion. Anyway, Malt liked playing house husband. But, obviously, it wasn't because he actually enjoyed it, but because he was insecure that he would not achieve as much as I did. He was afraid, and I didn't see it. They were younger, he said, and Malt just wouldn't speak up. So it wasn't a surprise when they finally fell apart. It was Malt who'd first filed for divorce. Soon after, he left the country. Then he returned and contested custody for Ariel. That was how the two ended up in joint custody. He was a good cook too. Things are cool between us now. So if he visits me someday, he should come over for dinner. The offer was so absurd that I couldn't help but chuckle a little. There was absolutely nothing between David and me for him to invite me over for dinner with his ex-husband, of all people. I can only imagine the awkwardness. Does that mean you're, single? I wasn't sure where the question had come from, but it was out, and there was no way I could take it back. If you're asking if I'm seeing someone, then no. Although he was giving me a smile, I couldn't help but notice the slight pinch between his eyebrows. I wondered what it meant, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to push and prod there. "What about you?" he asked. My answer was quicker than I'd like it to be. "Single." David smiled and returned to his dough. "Nice." "Nice," I agreed. A few days later. In the last few days, David and I had spent a good amount of time together. Obviously, we both said it was for the baking competition, but only an oblivious person wouldn't see the way I behaved around him. Was I taking advantage of this setting between us? Obviously I was. It helped that both Finn and Ariel had come to become good friends. It helped my case. A lot. One evening the following week, Finn's hands tried to drag me off the couch. No. I tried to resist his cute, pouty face. I am not moving. I pay rent. I'm supposed to enjoy it. Come with me to the park, he screamed with passion. God, sometimes I hated children. Not Finn, though. He was cute. Finn, let your uncle sleep. Uncle pays rent. Ariel's going to be at the park. Uncle David will be there. And that was all that I needed. I sat up on the couch and grabbed his small frame in my arms. Fine, let's go, Finn. I think your physical health is as important as your mental health. Haha! I knew it. Why was he suddenly talking like an adult? What did you know? You like Uncle David. Ariel said the same. I had half a mind to fall back on the couch and die right then and there. Kids were such a headache. They were impossible to get through. I am doing this for you. I am sure. Sometimes I wondered if my sister had returned as Finn. I am not going now. I was joking, Uncle Blake. Please, let's go. Well, who was I to deny Finn? David was sitting on a bench when Finn and I had finally reached the park. It was amazing to think that we lived so close to each other, yet had no idea about each other until that fateful conference. Finn found his friend, and I was forced to sit with David's familiar presence. Hi, I said. Oh, hi. He grabbed his notebook and made some space for me. Fancy seeing you here. I gave a small sigh. All because of Finn. For me too. Ariel said you'd be here. I had to come. That was, I thought to myself, TMI? I didn't want to know. Each admission from him brought a flush to my cheeks. I wasn't really sure how I was supposed to act next to him. When I didn't answer anything, it was because I couldn't think of any. He cleared his throat. Can I ask you something, Blake? This was easy. I nodded and folded my hands over my lap. Sure. What is it? Finn isn't your kid, is he? I've heard him calling you uncle. Oh, hell. I didn't want to answer, so I didn't. I remained mum and stared ahead at a laughing Finn. Finn wasn't my kid, obviously. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. David sounded a little comforting, looking worried as if he'd crossed a line. We can discuss other things. Would you like to see what I've drawn? And, well, that was easier to do. Over a year ago, my brother-in-law was diagnosed with cancer. He was at the second stage, so we still maintained hope that he'd come out just fine after his chemotherapy. On a very bad day, she had been driving them to the hospital for a scheduled checkup. She got distracted and hit an oncoming truck. She died right then and there. But my brother-in-law survived that horrible crash. But that didn't mean that he was free from cancer. Laden with guilt and grief, and with the fact that we didn't really have any close family members to fall back on, he decided to give me full parental rights for Finn. A few months later, he died. So, yes, Finn wasn't my kid. He was my sister's and brother-in-law's. But Finn and I had only recently come to terms with it. We were learning to live with it, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to share any of it with David yet. Or maybe I just wasn't ready. Because David sounded like a nice guy. He behaved like a nice guy. I knew things seemed easy with him, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for it all yet. So I kept my mouth shut and let David blabber like the bumbling fool he was. It was surprising that this habit of his was still the most attractive thing to me. Well, besides his handsome face. Late evening fell around us, and before we could leave, David tentatively grabbed my hand. Finn and Ariel were arguing over their homework, and it was loud. Even then, I felt at peace with his touch. It was nice being touched so kindly after so long. It was in these moments with David that I often realized I hadn't been very kind to myself in recent times, especially in the last few months. "I would like for us to meet again, Blake, if you'd like that," he said. There it was. Another warm confession. Or at least it seemed like that. "It's nice to get out of the house, talk to you." "I would like us to meet again too," I agreed. 2 days later. The competition was tomorrow, and David and I decided to give our baking skills one last try before the competition. Just like earlier times, Finn and Ariel were busy playing games or watching cartoons, and David and I were busy in the kitchen. I would admit, however, that his laughs made me less jittery. I only knew about baking as much as he taught me. Maybe I should bake something for Finn. "Maybe you can experiment," David agreed and handed me the bowl full of dough. I put it in the fridge. Now that we didn't really have anything to do except wait, he leaned against the counter and crossed his arms over his chest with a very thoughtful look on his face. I, for my part, stood on the other side a little awkwardly. I was picking on the skin of my fingertips, a nervous tic that I had gained a year ago in avoiding looking at him. Strangely, I could feel his eyes on me, and it was doing things to me. It felt nice to feel this warm after such a long time. I couldn't lie. It was addictive. "Blake, I wanted to tell you something," he said hesitantly. "Okay," I replied, not so very awkward. A tiny voice gasped, and I shut my eyes in pain. I kind of already knew what was coming. David chuckled along with me before we turned to the source of the noise. Finn was standing at the doorway, his color pencils in his hands. I could see the colorful lines along his arms. I would have to give him a proper bath after this. "Are you going to kiss now?" God darn it. My face reddened with shame when David laughed. "Finn," I said. "Watch your cartoon, Finn. Let us work." He giggled and looked genuinely happy, an expression that would have warmed if not for the current situation. "I will leave you, Uncle Blake." "Don't mind him," I said and grabbed dirty utensils sitting on the counter next to him. "I will clean these as we wait. We won't have a lot of cleaning work left then." "The question is, do you want to kiss me, Blake?" And there it was. The silence I was learning to grow fond of. For a minute, everything around us was on mute, even though I was sure I could hear Finn and Ariel loudly giggling in the living room. I turned to him, my face red with shame. "I haven't kissed anyone," I confessed. I was back to picking the skin at my fingertips. His smile dropped. "Like ever?" "Like in recent times," I replied, which was true for the most part. The last fling that I had was with the flower shop owner around the corner. The guy was nice, but he demanded more than I was capable of giving him then. The most we did was kissing. When I realized I couldn't handle his personality anymore, I bailed out on him. Not my proudest moment, but he didn't look like he held it against me. So, yes, I hadn't shared a meaningful kiss with someone in a long time. Partially, it was because of the grief I was dealing with, and partially because I didn't really want to get attached. I had seen the devastated state of my brother-in-law when my sister passed away. He often used to say that he couldn't get the image of her dead body out of his mind. He sighed. "We can return to work then?" "But I'd like to kiss you," I cut in. I wasn't sure if my game was still on, but it wouldn't hurt to try. Not if David wanted to try it too. "I'm not sure if I kiss good," I began again, a little furrow between my brows. "But I'd like to kiss you, David. If you'd like that, that is." He shrugged, but he was smiling. "I've wanted to kiss you since the day I saw you." "So the feelings are mutual, I assume?" "Very much so," And if we broke one of the glasses while passionately kissing in the kitchen for the next 5 minutes, the kids didn't need to know. The next day, Finn patted my hand before he was asked to sit on one of the judge's seats by his homeroom teacher. "Do well, Uncle Blake." I ran a hand through his head and promised that I'd do my best. Across the room, I could see David doing the same with his daughter. But the best wishes didn't really work in our favor. Not a lot, at least. David and I were placed second in the competition. The first was an old grandparents couple who'd come to represent their grandkids. I told David I was sure they won only because of their age. He gave a small laugh, but hushed me. When it was all over, we dragged mournful Finn and Ariel away from there, where they promised to give them their favorite ice creams. It seemed to do the trick. All in all, I believe the day had ended quite well. At least until David brought up his ex-husband. He insisted it was an important conversation that we needed to have. I decided it was also the best time to confess about my past and inform him about my past. I began first. Finn's my sister's son. That's why he calls me uncle. "Is your sister doing badly?" he asked and munched on his burger. I hadn't yet informed him about my sister's and her husband's death. They are, well, dead. "Oh," he muttered. "I'm so fucking sorry, Blake." "It's fine. It happened a year ago," which also meant it wasn't fine. It has always been a difficult conversation for me. When I'd first met Finn's homeroom teacher after his parents' death, she had looked both sad and doubtful if I was capable of taking care of Finn in my state. I'd just started my first job, and although it paid well, I had little experience in handling a kid. If Finn wasn't my sister's kid, there was a good chance I would have lost him. Even now, CPS comes for thorough checking. It's a process, they say. I believe they just don't trust me, even though I've never given them any reason to doubt me. "I really didn't know that." "I'm sorry, Blake." "What did you think?" He looked a little embarrassed now. "I thought you had Finn from a previous marriage, but when I heard him calling you uncle, I wasn't so sure anymore. I had my doubts, but I didn't think it was this bad." He turned a little to look through the window and at the small figure of Finn. "How is he dealing with it?" "It was bad. Really, really bad then," I replied as honestly as I could. But Finn was already close to me when they died, so that made things a little easy. He was glad that he was going to live with me. I think it helped. He made a small wounded sound from the back of his throat. "But Blake, you must know you're doing really well in raising him. He is the sweetest kid I have ever met, and his manners are so genteel. I almost always feel like he belongs to the aristocracy class." I gave a small laugh. "You're flattering me." "I am not. I'm being honest. He's a good kid." "That he is," I agreed, although most of what he had learnt about mannerisms came from his parents. My late sister was very strict about this particular thing. "You were saying something about Malt?" And this was when the day turned bad. He confessed that although things between Malt and him had officially ended, they still slept together. In fact, the last time they slept together was 4 weeks ago, some 2 weeks before we first met. He promised that he hadn't slept with Malt since, but I couldn't shake the thought off my head that he could do that easily again. My goodbye to him was a lot better than I wanted it to, and I decided not to pick up his calls for the next few days. I believed he knew where I lived, and if he wanted to explain himself, he could easily do so. A few days later, Finn was at school when David came to my house. I had taken a day off from the office, even though it was entirely work from home, to wallow in self-pity and hurt. David was a nice guy, and I'd liked him from the first moment I'd seen him. So the very thought that I might have lost him to his ex-husband was more than upsetting. The very fact that he was still sleeping with his ex-husband even after so many years of divorce scared me. What were the chances that this would continue if something finally started between us? What if that guy returned and ruined everything before it actually started? I was scared enough. I wasn't sure I wanted to take that chance. But then David looked like a mess standing outside my door, and I wondered if I brought out the same kind of response from him that he did with me. If not, he wouldn't look like that. "Blake," he said when I opened the door. "Please talk to me." We had known each other for only 2 days or so weeks by now. He had no reason to look so distraught over something at such an early stage. But he looked, and that was flattering. His voice made me feel wanted, and it was a nice feeling after everything. "I promise nothing's going on between Malt and me. We slept together because we weren't seeing anyone. In fact, I have told him about you, and we decided it would be best to stop it now that one of us has finally found someone. Blake." He sounded a little too desperate now. "I will never hurt you." "When was the last time you slept with him?" 4 weeks ago, he answered. "Weeks before I met you." "But you guys will still have to meet?" He gave me a resigned look. "I cannot do anything about that, Blake. We share joint custody of Ariel. We will have to meet, though, obviously, it's only going to be about Ariel. Nothing else, I promise." And that was all I needed to hear. This was a huge step. This almost felt like gambling. But David and I had clicked instantly. He had seemed attractive to me the moment I first laid eyes on him, and it seemed to be the same case for him. So, until I took this chance, I wasn't ever going to know what it would end like. Hence, I took his hand in my own and jumped into his arms. He wrapped his free hand around my waist, and honestly, this was the first time I felt at home in almost an entire year. "I really want to take this chance with you, Blake. I will do my best by you." And I agreed. Maybe it was time for me to finally step forward. Finn would love to hear about it. Ariel would too. We gave a small laugh to each other. But we didn't tell the kids until we were sure we were ready to take the first step into this relationship, which, sure, happened some weeks after that little meeting between us. In conclusion, I met Malt before my first official date with David. Malt was a nice guy, and David said that he had improved a lot in the last few years. Malt joked that the distance had done him some good. David and Malt still had Ariel's joint custody, and they often met to share Ariel's responsibility. In the next few weeks, David had grown close to Finn too. This not only helped us gain the kids' approval, but also made things easier for me. Now, the evenings at the park seemed like a routine. By the time the next parent-teacher conference was held, David and I arrived at the school together. In that time period, a lot had changed. The end. Have you ever clicked with someone instantly? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force, and to stay wholesome.